The holotable flickered, casting a dim glow over the War Council. "Joaquin, listen carefully," Pablo Escobar said, his voice sharp as steel. "No matter what happens in that meeting, don't speak unless I tell you to. Not even if they insult you. Not even if they threaten you." Joaquin El Chapo. Guzman nodded, adjusting the collar of his uniform. "Understood." Across the room, Al Capone chuckled, rolling a knife between his fingers. "You think these aliens are dumb enough to betray us?" Griselda Blanco, the Black Widow, smirked. "If they are, I'll gut them before they can regret it." Escobar's gaze was ice cold. "Then we're all in agreement." The ship's ramp lowered, and the stale air of the alien war zone rushed in. The human delegation stepped forward, Escobar in the lead, flanked by Capone, Guzman, and Blanco. Beyond the landing pad, 12 alien figures awaited them, their forms twisted by war and resentment. At the center stood Grand Marshal Kratos, his 4 crimson eyes burning with distrust. With a silent hand signal, a dozen alien soldiers emerged from the ruins, carrying objects wrapped in black cloth. Guzman narrowed his eyes, hands twitching near his sidearm. Escobar didn't react. The aliens unwrapped the objects, a set of small metallic tables and 5 seats. Kratos sat first, his generals flanking him. Escobar followed, his people standing behind him like statues. Kratos leaned forward, voice like gravel. "We do not need these games, Escobar. Let's get to the point." Escobar smiled, slow and deliberate. "Agreed." The fate of humanity's last free fleet hung in the balance. The air between them was thick with distrust. Grand Marshal Kratos rested his clawed hands on the table, his red eyes unblinking. His generals sat rigid, their weapons within easy reach. Escobar leaned back, calm and unreadable. "Let's talk survival." Kratos scoffed. "Survival? You humans are parasites. Your colonies burn, your fleets scatter, and yet you come here pretending you have power." Capone grinned, his fingers tapping the handle of his knife. "Funny. If we're so weak, why haven't you killed us already?" A murmur rippled through the alien ranks. Kratos' jaw clenched. "Because extermination takes time," he admitted. "And resources." Escobar saw the crack immediately. They needed something. "Good." He leaned forward. "We both know your war isn't going well. The Zxari Empire is closing in, isn't it?" Kratos flinched. Just barely. But it was enough. Blanco's smirk widened. "Thought so." A heavy silence followed. Then, finally, Kratos exhaled. "You want a truce?" Escobar's eyes were cold steel. "No, Marshal. We want an alliance." The alien warlord stared, caught between disbelief and fury. Kratos' voice dropped to a growl. "Give me one reason. I shouldn't have you all executed right now." Escobar's smile didn't falter. "Because if you do, the black ship will burn this world to ash." The airlocks of their ship hissed open, and the deep hum of unseen power rumbled through the ground. Kratos' eyes widened. Escobar leaned back. "Now, let's talk terms." Kratos' clawed fingers dug into the table, his 4 crimson eyes locked onto Escobar. The warlord's generals shifted uncomfortably, their weapons still within reach. "You're bluffing." Kratos snarled. Escobar shrugged, his smirk never fading. "Am I?" Behind him, Blanco whispered something into her comms. A moment later, the black ship's external cannons hummed to life, their deep, throbbing energy shaking the ground. The air crackled with power as the ship's orbital defense grid primed itself. The alien soldiers stiffened, their hands twitching toward their weapons. Capone grinned, placing a small device on the table. A holographic projection blinked to life. It showed real-time orbital targeting data, coordinates locked onto the alien stronghold surrounding the ruins. Escobar folded his arms. Still think I'm bluffing? Krathos's jaw tightened. His generals exchanged wary glances, their confidence wavering. One of them, a lean warrior with scarred green skin, finally spoke. If you had this power, why didn't you use it the moment you arrived? Blanco chuckled, leaning forward. Because we're not idiots. Escobar's tone remained calm, controlled. We don't want to burn your cities. We want a deal. Krathos's claws tapped against the metal table, the rhythmic sound echoing in the tense silence. And if I refuse, Escobar didn't hesitate. Then we leave, and when the Zxari Empire comes for you, you'll have no one left to turn to. Krathos glared, but Escobar saw the doubt creeping in. Good. The warlord finally exhaled. What do you want? Escobar smiled. A trade agreement, military support, and safe passage through your territory. Krathos's generals bristled, but the warlord raised a hand, silencing them. He leaned forward. In exchange for what? Escobar's grin widened. Weapons. The tension in the room spiked. Krathos narrowed his eyes. You want our technology? Escobar shook his head. No, Marshal. We're giving you ours. The alien warlords froze. Even Krathos seemed momentarily speechless. Escobar leaned back, satisfied. Now, he had their attention. The silence was palpable. Krathos's generals exchanged uncertain glances, their rigid postures betraying their unease. Escobar could see it in their twitching claws, the subtle shift in their breathing. They hadn't expected this. Finally, Krathos spoke, his voice slower, more measured. You're offering us human weapons? Escobar nodded. Advanced kinetics, high-yield explosives, stealth tech, everything you need to fight the Zxari. Capone pulled a small device from his coat and slid it across the table. It activated on touch, projecting an image of a Terran battle rifle, sleek, compact, and brutally efficient. Blanco smiled coldly. Your plasma burns hot. Our bullets hit harder. One of Krathos's generals, a hulking brute with dark gray skin, scoffed. Primitive toys. Escobar chuckled, snapping his fingers. The black ship answered. A single railgun round fired from orbit, ripping through the air at hypersonic speed before slamming into a distant mountainside. The explosion was instantaneous, reducing rock and metal into a fireball of dust and flame. The shockwave hit seconds later, rattling the very ground beneath them. The alien warriors flinched. Even Krathos's composed mask cracked as he turned toward the distant plume of black smoke curling into the sky. Escobar's grin widened. Still think they're toys? The room was dead silent. Finally, Krathos exhaled. You want an alliance. Escobar nodded. We want survival, and so do you. Krathos leaned back, his crimson eyes narrowing. You have my attention, Escobar. What are your terms? Escobar's smile never wavered. Now, the real negotiations began. Krathos sat motionless, his crimson eyes locked onto Escobar. His generals, once defiant, were silent now, still shaken by the raw power the black ship had just demonstrated. Escobar leaned forward, fingers laced together. Here's the deal. The holotable flickered, displaying 3 key points in sharp Terran script. 1. We supply your armies with human weaponry. 2. You grant us unrestricted passage through your controlled space. 3. If the Zxari invade, we fight together. Krathos's claws tapped against the metal table, the rhythmic clicks the only sound in the tense room. And what do you want in return? He asked, voice low and dangerous. Escobar's smile didn't fade. Loyalty. A heavy silence fell over the room. Krathos exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. His generals whispered amongst themselves in their guttural language, their voices edged with uncertainty and fear. One of them, the gray-skinned brute who had mocked their weapons earlier, growled. You expect us to swear fealty to humans. Blanco snorted, arms crossed. We expect you to survive. Capone rolled his knife between his fingers, watching the alien closely. Your people are losing this war. You know it. We know it. The Zxari will burn every world you own to ash. Kratos' jaw tightened. He knew they were right. Escobar's voice was calm but firm. Alone, you fall. Together, we stand a chance. Kratos looked at the holo display, the words etched in cold logic. He exhaled slowly. Then he extended his hand. Escobar's grin widened. He grasped the alien's wrist, shaking firmly. The room held its breath. An alliance was forged, and humanity's last stand had just begun. The handshake lingered, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone in the room. Escobar studied Kratos. The alien warlord's crimson eyes filled with hesitation. His generals looked at one another, some with approval, others with barely hidden disgust. Escobar pulled back, folding his arms. Now that we're allies, let's talk strategy. Kratos' claws drummed against the table. Before that, I have a question. Escobar gestured for him to continue. Why? Kratos' voice was quieter now. Your kind could have fled. You could have hidden in the void, waited for the war to burn itself out. But you came here. You offered us weapons. You risked everything. Why? For the first time, Escobar's grin faded. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Because we don't run. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Capone smirked, flicking his knife in his hand. The Zxari don't just conquer. They erase. Blanco nodded. They turn planets into graveyards, burn the soil, poison the air. There's nothing left when they're done. Escobar's voice was steady. We've seen what they do to species that surrender. If we're going to die, we'd rather do it standing. Kratos studied them carefully, then exhaled sharply. Then we fight together. The table shook as he slammed his fist against it, a war cry in his native tongue echoing through the hall. His generals hesitated. Then, one by one, they rose, pounding their fists against their chests in agreement. The black ship's cannons hummed overhead, a reminder of the firepower at their backs. Escobar stood, his voice cold as steel. Then let's show the Zxari what happens when they push humanity too far. The war council had ended, but the real battle was only beginning. Escobar, Kratos, and their newly allied forces stood before the holotable, where a three-dimensional projection of the battlefield flickered. The Zxari fleet was on the move. Hundreds of bioships, grotesque, insectoid vessels surged through space, consuming everything in their path. Planets reduced to husks, cities wiped clean, armies devoured. Kratos clenched his fists. They're coming for us next. Escobar nodded, calm but calculating. Then we hit them first. Blanco stepped forward, arms crossed. We can't win a direct fight. Their numbers are too high. Capone smirked. So we don't fight fair. Escobar turned to Kratos. How many ships do you have? Kratos hesitated, then exhaled. A fraction of what we once had. But we still have 3 war fleets. Escobar's grin returned. Good, that's all we need. The room fell silent. Escobar pointed to the holomap, his voice sharp and precise. The Zxari move like a swarm. They're predictable. If we lure them into the nebula expanse, we can cut them off, divide them, and wipe them out one by one. One of Kratos' generals growled. That's suicide. If they don't fall for the trap, we'll be slaughtered. Escobar didn't flinch. That's why we used the black ship. The room stilled. Kratos' eyes narrowed. Explain. Escobar's smile was razor sharp. We make them think they've already won. Blanco and Capone grinned, already seeing where this was going. Escobar tapped the holotable. We send the black ship in alone. Let them think they've caught us off guard. They'll swarm in, trying to rip it apart. He paused. That's when we spring the trap. Kratos' generals looked at one another. uncertain. Kratos stared at the map. Then, slowly, he nodded. It might just work. Escobar's grin widened. Oh, it will, because they have no idea what's coming. The Zxari fleet loomed ahead. A monstrous hive of bioships, their chitinous hulls writhing with alien energy. Inside the black ship, Escobar stood on the bridge, staring at the approaching swarm. Capone leaned against the console, spinning his knife between his fingers. That's a lot of bugs. Blanco smirked. Too bad they're walking into a slaughter. Escobar didn't smile. His eyes stayed locked on the enemy ships. We're outnumbered 100-1. His voice was calm. Perfect. Kratos' fleet remained hidden, concealed within the nebula expanse, their engines silent, weapons primed. The trap was set. The Zxari took the bait. A transmission crackled through the bridge speakers. A hissing insectoid voice filled with mockery and hunger. Terran vessel, your kind is weak. Your species will be consumed. Escobar exhaled, adjusting his gloves. Come and try. The Zxari swarmed forward, their ships moving in an erratic, terrifying mass, closing in from all sides. Inside the black ship, the crew remained silent, waiting. Capone flicked open a detonator. On your mark, boss. Escobar watched the holo display. The enemy ships crossed the threshold into the kill zone. Now he nodded once. Capone pressed the switch. The nebula exploded. A wall of nuclear fire erupted from the gas clouds, igniting hidden mines, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Zxari ships shattered instantly, their organic hulls ripped apart by the sudden inferno. Then, Kratos' warfleet struck. From the shadows of the nebula, hundreds of ships emerged, their cannons vomiting death into the chaos-stricken Zxari ranks. Blanco laughed. They never saw it coming. The black ship surged forward, its railguns and plasma turrets unleashing devastation, tearing through Zxari battlecruisers like paper. The enemy screeched in panic, their swarming formations collapsing as shock and fear spread through their hive mind. Escobar stood still, watching the carnage unfold. Burn them all. The battlefield became a graveyard. The battlefield burned. Zxari bioships twisted and screeched, their organic hulls splitting apart under the relentless barrage of Terran and Kratos' warfleets. Flames and debris littered the void, once a hive of unstoppable creatures, now a graveyard. But the fight wasn't over yet. Escobar stood on the black ship's bridge, his arms crossed as he watched the Zxari's hive mind shift tactics. The survivors stopped their chaotic retreat. Instead, they began to merge, their ships linking together like a growing tumor. Blanco's smirk vanished. What the hell are they doing? Capone's knife stilled in his hand. That's new. The Zxari mothership was forming. Massive, grotesque tendrils of flesh and metal fused together, absorbing the wreckage of their fallen, growing into something monstrous. A living warship, pulsing with hive energy. A deep, inhuman voice resonated across all channels. We are the swarm. You cannot kill what does not die. Then, the mothership fired. A black beam of energy tore through space, vaporizing an entire wing of Kratos' fleet in a single, horrifying instant. The bridge shook violently as shockwaves slammed into the black ship. Escobar stumbled, gripping the console. Damage report. A crewman's voice came through, panicked. Shields down to 42%. Another hit like that and... The black ship's hull groaned, alarms blaring across every deck. Kratos' voice crackled through the comms. Escobar! If that thing fires again, we're finished! Escobar's jaw tightened. He looked at the holo display, calculating. One move. One shot. Blanco wiped blood from her lip, grinning through the chaos. Say the word, boss. Escobar exhaled sharply. We end this. Capone tossed his knife in the air, catching it without looking. How? Escobar turned toward the crew. Divert all power to the main cannon. gasps. The black ship's primary weapon, a planet-killer railgun, so powerful that firing it at full capacity would leave them defenseless for minutes. A suicide move. Blanco laughed. I love this plan. Krathos's voice boomed in disbelief. Are you insane? If you miss, Escobar grinned darkly. I don't miss. The black ship's railgun began charging, its entire hull shaking as it pulled energy from every available source. Lights flickered, shields dropped, engines powered down. The ship became a floating gun barrel, aimed directly at the Zxari mothership. The hive mind realized too late. The Zxari mothership fired its death beam, but this time, the black ship didn't move to dodge. It fired. The railgun round screamed through space, a solid tungsten slug traveling at near light speed. The two weapons met. The Zxari's black energy beam clashing with the Terran projectile of extinction. A heartbeat of silence. Then, detonation. The Zxari mothership didn't just explode, it imploded. Its hive mind shattered in an instant, its energy reversing in on itself before collapsing in a blinding flash of white. The entire Zxari fleet froze, their once coordinated movements turning erratic, confused, leaderless. The war was over. Krathos's ships swept through the remnants, mopping up the stragglers. On the bridge of the black ship, Escobar let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Capone leaned against the smoking console, wiping sweat from his brow. That was fun. Blanco laughed, her voice raw. Next time, let's fight someone easier. Krathos's voice came through the comms, awed. You actually did it. Escobar smiled. Told you I don't miss. The battle was won, but Escobar knew this was just the beginning. The black ship remained in orbit, its guns cooling, its crew exhausted but victorious. Humanity had made its last stand, and now it was time to rebuild.